So we are delighted to start off this circuit seminar this semester with Felix Fischer, who has just arrived in Caesar a few weeks ago as a postdoc on scholarship from the German Academic Exchange. Felix works on computational aspects of game theory and multiple choice theory, and really bridges from looking at things from a game theoretic perspective and looking at things from a computational complexity perspective, and is really a perfect fit for the sort of econ CS side of services activities. Indeed, he's been here only a few weeks, but already we'll be talking about joint work with two of our other circus fellows, Ariel and Ian, on kidney exchanges.
Thank you, Sally, and good morning from me as well. Thank you all for coming. So as Sally had said, I'm going to speak about joint work with Itay Schlagi from HBS and with Ian Cash and Ariel Procaccia. We're also in that circus. And I'm going to talk about kidney exchanges, or work motivated by kidney exchanges. So as probably all of you know, there's basically two types of treatment for end-stage kidney diseases. One is dialysis, so where you basically have to go to have your blood cleaned with a machine once or twice a day. And the other option is the transplantation of a kidney. The good news is that humans have two kidneys, and it's actually possible to do live donation. So they can give one of their kidneys away. And studies so far have shown no long-term negative effect for the donors. So that's actually a good thing. But the problem here is that the patient who's supposed to receive the kidney might not be compatible with the potential donor. So potential donor are usually close friends or relatives of the patient. And to be compatible, they need to have a matching blood type, for example, and also certain tissue parameters are also important for that. And what has been done for the past 10 years maybe are kidney exchanges. So kidney exchanges enable transplantations in cases where a potential donor is not compatible with his or her patient. And so the basic case we're looking at in this talk is simply two donor-patient pairs, such that the donor of one pair is compatible with the patient of the other pair, and vice versa. So they can have two transplantations, and they effectively swap the donor's kidneys. Is that clear? Okay. So let's look at what incentives might show up in these kidney exchanges. So first, there's incentives within a single paired exchange. So you have two donor-patient pairs, and they exchange the kidneys. So actually, if you conduct one of the transplantations first, then the second donor might just say, "Oh, actually, I thought about this, and I no longer want to take place in the exchange." So one transplantation has already taken place, and the second might not take place because the donor changed his mind as soon as his patient is fine. So this can simply be handled by conducting the two transplantations simultaneously. Okay, so here's no real incentives that harm the exchange. But another problem that shows up as these exchanges become more common is that hospitals might be interested. So there's several hospitals. Think about a setting where several hospitals are involved, and each of them naturally only or cares most about their own patients. So they want to maximize the number of their own patients that receive a donation. So ideally, you would want to have a large nationwide or regional, or at least regional exchange. But on the other hand, the hospitals might not want to show all of their patients, or might have an incentive to hide some of their patients from this large exchange, and instead match them with other own patients and maybe show some of their patients, only some of their patients to the exchange.
Sorry.
Okay, question?
Can you talk a little more about why the hospitals would want to do that?
No, so I'm not going to talk about the background. But you can imagine that I don't know, they just want the figures to look good. So they want to say in our hospital 90% of people with kidney disease received a transplantation within a year or things like that. Is that reasonable?
Doesn't hiding their donor list or hiding kind of donor-patient pair make it less likely to find the donor patients?
Yeah, so they might, for example, look at the donor-patient list that's already in the exchange, and then they might see, oh, there's these 2 patients, and that I can actually match within my own hospital. So why would I send them to the donor-patient list? Okay. So we're talking about a complete information setting, where basically every hospital knows what the other hospitals are doing. Okay. Okay. So before I continue, let me give you an outline of the talk. So first, I'll tell you about a formal model that is trying to capture the incentives of hospitals in kidney exchanges. Then I will speak about lower bounds. So lower bounds in the setting means there's a certain parameter that tells us something about the quality of the system. And the smaller this parameter, the better the quality of the outcome that's achieved. So lower bounds simply means it's kind of an impossibility result. So given this formal model, no mechanism with certain properties can achieve a lower or a higher quality, so a lower value for this parameter at all. Okay, so this is basically going to tell us what we can aim for, what's the best we could possibly achieve. Okay, and then in the second part of the talk, I will look at 2 types of mechanisms. The first ones are deterministic mechanisms, and the second one are mechanisms where an element of chance is involved. So where we toss coin and match donors and patients randomly. So let's start with the formal model. So we simply have a set n of agents corresponding to the hospital. So as I said, the entities that have incentives in our setting are the hospitals. And then we look at a graph and the set of vertices. So we have a set of vertices and a set of edges. The set of vertices corresponds to the donor-patient pair. So each vertex corresponds to a donor-patient pair. And they're actually, the set of vertices is partitioned into sets V sub I corresponding to the agents. Okay, so each agent has a set of vertices, and then we put all of these vertices together, and we have a graph on them. And an edge between 2 vertices simply means that the donor of one pair is compatible with the patient of the other pair, and the donor of the other pair is compatible with the patient of the first pair. Okay, so if we have an edge, that means a transplantation in both directions could actually take place. Question?
Sorry, is this ruling out multiple exchanges?
Yeah, so in this work, we only look at paired exchanges. Okay. Okay, so what happens then is that each agent reports a subset of his donor-patient pairs, and the mechanism looks at the subgraph induced by these subsets. Okay, and given such a graph, the mechanism produces a matching of this graph. So a matching is simply a subset of the edges of the graph, such that no 2 edges meet in the same vertex. Okay, so these are actually each matching corresponds to a set of transplantations that can take place. And then we also allow each agent I to add an additional matching for vertices he has hidden and vertices that have not yet been matched by the mechanism. So it's kind of a two-stage process. First, donors and patients or donor-patient pairs get matched by this large regional or nationwide exchange, and then the hospital can still match patients that it has hidden or patients that haven't been matched by the mechanism. Okay? Does that sound reasonable? Okay, and then the utility of an agent is simply the number of vertices that are matched in this two-stage process. So either by the mechanism or privately by the agent or by the hospital. Okay. Okay. So what properties would we want these mechanisms to satisfy? So first, as we said in the beginning, we want them to be strategy-proof. So we actually we want no agent to be able to gain by hiding vertices. Okay. The second property is we want the resulting matching to have good quality. So we want to, and we're actually going to compare this to the best quality that is possible if nobody would lie. Okay. So if we just had all the information and could compute an optimal matching of maximum cardinality. So we're going to say that a mechanism is alpha efficient if the ratio between the size of the maximum cardinality matching, or a maximum cardinality matching, because there might be several, and the matching returned by the mechanism is at most alpha. Okay? So this is going to be a number that is between 1 and, say, half the number of vertices. Okay? No, it can also be infinite, because we might not be able to match any donor-patient pairs. Okay, then this number is going to be infinite. And the smaller this number, the better. So one efficient mechanism is simply an efficient, economically efficient mechanism. And a third property that we want our mechanisms to satisfy is that there is no monetary payments involved. So I don't know whether you agree, but in most countries it's considered unethical to buy organs or to give money to somebody to donate a kidney, and in most countries it's also illegal to do that. Okay, so we want these mechanisms to go without payments. And these three properties taken together actually mean that this question fits perfectly in the line of work called approximate mechanism design without money, which was proposed by Ariel and Moshe Tenenholz last year. Okay.
So already here, I mean, it already comes the first identical with your strategy proofness. It already comes with Alan's question, right? That you're saying that hospitals may have an incentive to hide, not for, I mean, even just if their only goal is to maximize how many patients are matched. It doesn't have to be something external like having a higher percentage for PR purposes or anything. No. I guess the risk, so if they could match all of them on their own, the risk in revealing is that they might get matched externally, some of them, and some of them may be left without.
Right. Exactly. So I thought Alan's question was directed at whether a hospital cares at all about the number of its patients that get matched.
I was more interested in exploring the social efficiency of matching inside versus outside, but we'll get to that.
Okay. So in our model, the hospital only cares about the number of his own patients that are matched. Question?
The agents aren't the actual patients here, and the agents are certainly making money. So is there still an obstruction to having the agents exchange money for this, or is it still illegal?
So you mean patients exchanging money?
No, the hospital. The agents are in hospitals.
So
all the Harvard hospitals get together and form a signed cartel and have transfers of money to bring their numbers up.
yeah, so I think that's something one could look at.
One final question. So, like, definitions, it seems that the hospital only cares about maximizing its number, and it doesn't care about what necessarily care about other hospitals. So could it also be the case that the hospital really just wants it to do better than than its competing hospital and the next state over, so they can be higher in the rankings? And that would, I mean, that if they actually cared about this, they probably don't, because it's something so sensitive as kidneys. But if
yeah, so I guess it's.
That would be outside.
I guess it depends on how you model the preferences. So the way we did it is you simply, and that's also the usual way you do things in game theory, is that you only care about your own payoff, and not the. Of course, you could define payoffs to include something about the other hospitals. Yeah, so maybe it's interesting. We could look at that as well. Okay.
And your goal is to maximize matching. You want to maximize the number of edges.
Number of the number of edges or the number of vertices. So if you look at a specific hospital, so a matching is consists of edges, and each of these edges has two vertices, right? So the size of the matching taken as the number of edges is simply 1/2 the number of vertices that get matched. But if you match across different hospitals, then actually the payoff one hospital gets might only be 1 for one edge.
So I didn't follow that concept.
So if you have one edge and two vertices, then the payoff a specific hospital gets for this edge depends on whether it's inside the hospital or whether it's across hospitals. So what we're measuring here, so the utility is simply for each hospital the number of vertices that get matched. Okay. Okay. So as I promised, I'm going to start with lower bounds. So these lower bounds say any mechanism with these, so no mechanism with these properties can satisfy efficiency or alpha efficiency for alpha smaller than a certain value. Okay, so this is going to set the bound of what we can achieve at all if we want to go without payments and if we want strategy proofness. So the theorem is if there are at least two agents, so that's the most basic setting, because if there's only one agent, we can simply compute the maximum cardinality matching, and nobody would want to deviate. Then no deterministic strategy proof mechanism can be alpha efficient for alpha smaller than 2. Okay, so 2 efficiency is the best we can get, and also no randomized strategy proof mechanism can be alpha efficient for alpha smaller than 4/3. So in principle, with a randomized mechanism, we might do better, but still we are not going to do better than 4/3. Okay. So let me actually show you how we can prove this bound. So let's look at a graph. So it's simply 7 vertices, and we have 2 agents. So one agent owns the red vertices, and one agent owns the blue vertices. Okay. And since there's an odd number of vertices here, simply means that even if we match optimally, then one of the vertices is not going to be matched. Okay? And now there's 2 cases. So either one of the blue vertices is not matched, or one of the red vertices is not matched. So assume first that one of the blue vertices is not matched. Okay? And now look at the graph where the left 2 blue vertices have been hidden. Okay? And now, of course, the blue agent can match these 2 vertices internally because there is an edge between them. But now notice that on the right-hand side, there's a graph with 4 vertices, but one of them is blue, right? And before the blue agent hid his vertices, we didn't match all blue vertices. So now, if we actually return the matching, if the mechanism returned the matching for the right 4 vertices, or for the remaining graph, including the left one that cannot be matched at all, returned a matching of size 2, then there would be a benefit for the blue agent, right? Because before, only 2 of his vertices were matched, And now if we match everything on the right-hand side, then 3 of his vertices are matched. So that means we're not allowed, the mechanism, if it's going to be strategy proof, is not allowed to match the blue vertex. So this means that now we have a graph consisting of 5 vertices or 4 vertices, because the 2 blue ones on the left have been hidden, where the maximum cardinality matching has size 2, but the matching the mechanism is going to return has size as at most 1. Okay? And this means it's only 2 efficient. And the second case works similarly. So assume that a vertex of the red agent hasn't been matched, then he can hide these 2 vertices. And now we're basically in the same situation. So in the remaining graph, the optimal matching has size 2, but the matching the mechanism can return due to strategy proofness only has size 1. Okay? And the same example also works to get the randomized bound. So here you simply start with the original graph, and you say with probability, so there's one of the 2 agents that gets all of his vertices matched with probability at most 1/2. And then you do the calculations, and then you arrive at 4/3. Yes?
Are you sure that in the context of kidney exchange, it's possible to have a graph in like that structure with just those edges and not any others? Because if you look at like over-demanded and under-demanded pairs, it seems like for those edges that you have there, you're basically considering like an over-demanded donor and an under-demanded patient for each vertex.
Okay, so it's true that the results we have now are worst case results. So we don't make any assumptions on the distribution of blood types or anything. So these mechanisms we get here work for anything.
Pretty much anything is at least possible when you take into account tissue factors. It's not necessarily likely, but sort of any structure can end up because of those.
Yeah, so you requiring dominant strategies here, because if you just have a strong dominant strategy, sorry, because wouldn't a weakly dominant strategy allow you to continue to match that? So you'd be indifferent between honest reporting and cheating in that case?
So no, so usually the notion of stability used in mechanism design is weakly dominant strategies.
So even a weakly dominant strategy wouldn't allow you to match that in the strategy proof?
True.
Surprising.
Because you would actually, so if the mechanism would match everything, then you would actually gain by lying, right? Because in this graph, so if you're the blue agent and the mechanism matches everything, then you get strictly more vertices. So it's actually a dominant strategy too. It would be a dominant strategy to lie in this case.
I just want to make sure I follow this example, because it seems like the optimal match if everyone reports honestly is 3 edges, and it seems like you get 2 edges matched by the strategy proof mechanism. Just one of them is happening in a hospital.
Yes, but now but now assume that these 2 vertices, these 2 blue vertices, don't exist at all.
Right.
And the mechanism is not going to know whether they exist or not. So this also means that for the graph consisting only of these 4 vertices here and this 1 vertex here, the mechanism still cannot return a matching of size more than 1.
Edge, but if those 2 blue vertices didn't exist, it's not clear why you would have an incentive to you're assuming that it can't match that blue vertex.
Yes.
Because those edges exist.
Because they might exist.
But if they do exist, then there's an edge being matched. So. But if they don't exist, then you might match. Then there's constraint that it can't match the blue vertex.
but you don't know whether they exist.
But one of the 2 is happening. I'm just not sure why this is the right comparison. I mean, what if the maximal matching existed completely within hospitals? Like, there's just a a dense graph and no hospital revealed everything and they all did the maximal match, then there would be no loss of efficiency.
Approximation ratios are a worst case guarantee.
But nothing's lost. I mean, it seems like you're strictly saying that the number of edges matched in the centralized matching has to be competitive with the number of edges matched if everyone reveals. But the central match could be completely useless. I mean, it's entirely possible you just don't need it at all. So it seems like we should be looking at, comparing the total edges matched in the world. I understand the mechanism,
But yeah, what the mechanism does can only depend on the information that's actually revealed.
So assume
The
you.
mechanism has to behave the same if the real graph is without those present, or if it's present and not revealed. That's the same behavior.
So these two situations are exactly the same, look exactly the same to the mechanism. And the mechanism is just a function that maps a graph to a matching.
Right. I mean, you see this. It still seems like how we evaluate the mechanism should change. I understand that this constraint is there, that if you don't know that.
Okay, but even if you change how you evaluate the mechanism, so what is the mechanism going to do if it receives a graph like this?
Right, no, I understand. They can't match the blue vertex on the right because
Right.
there might be
And even if so how do you want to measure efficiency in this case?
I mean,
You have possibly you can do 2 matches, but you only do 1, even if there's nothing else involved, no hidden vertices.
Right, and I understand why it makes sense in this context, but it doesn't seem to really make sense in the context of real kidney exchanges. I mean, I think it doesn't make sense if you assume any sensible distribution on where these come from, or
Are you saying that the hospital is going to match that pair anyway?
right. My argument is that the hospital is for there to be this blue vertex that can't get matched, there has to exist some edge that's going to be matched. And I understand why there might not be that edge, but it seems like we still need to consider what's really going on and evaluate these in terms of.
Probably we should take this discussion. I'll let Felix continue to talk.
Go on.
Okay. Okay. So now that we have this lower bound and now that we actually know what's the best we can achieve, let's look at actual mechanisms. Okay. And I'll start with a deterministic mechanism that's only for 2 agents. Okay. So just like the case we've seen before. And what this mechanism does is it first takes a matching that has maximum cardinality on both individual sets. So if you take the induced subgraph for each of the 2 sets of vertices belonging to the 2 agents, then it has the resulting matching has maximum cardinality. And then among all matchings that have this property, simply select one that has the largest size possible. Okay. So let's look at what this mechanism does for the original graph from which we got the lower bound. So first of all, it's going to match the 2 blue vertices, okay? Because the resulting matching, because of the first property that the resulting matching needs to have maximum cardinality on V1. So say the blue agent is agent 1, okay? So if the restriction to only the blue vertices needs to have maximum cardinality, then we certainly need to include this edge in the matching. And then we can, the first property also tells us that we need to include one of these 2 edges in the matching. But given the second property, it's actually better to include this edge because then we can include another one. Okay? So this is actually the unique matching mechanism satisfying these 2 properties can return. So now let's look at what happens. So now the red agent, agent 2, is unhappy. So now let's look at what happens if he hides his 2 vertices as before. Okay? So now the first property means that still we have to match these two vertices, okay? So now the red agent no longer gains. But this is only, as we've seen before, this can only be at most or at best too efficient, okay? But it seems like this works, and actually we'll see later that this mechanism for two agents is strategy proof. And another observation is that it's actually too efficient. So it's actually achieves the bound matching the lower bound we've seen before. And why is that? Well, given the second property, we notice that the matching returned by the mechanism is inclusion maximal. So this means it's not possible to add more edges to the matching and still have the property that no of the two edges meet. Okay, and it's a well-known fact from fact that's been known for a long time, that every inclusion maximal matching has size at least half of that of a maximum cardinality matching. So what we get here is too efficient. Okay. So since this looks promising, let's try to generalize it to more than two agents, right? Because in general, we want something that works for any number of agents. So a sensible generalization might look like this. You simply take the first property now to hold for all of the agents. So for any, when restricted to any set Vi for agent I, the matching has to have maximum cardinality. And then again, among all matchings satisfying this property, select one that has maximum cardinality overall. So what I'm going to show you now is that this is not quite enough. Okay? So look at this slightly bigger graph. And the first property already tells us that we need to match these two blue vertices here and these two blue vertices here, because this is the only way to get maximum cardinality on the blue vertices. Okay? So now we see that for the remaining vertices, we actually have different choices. So what the mechanism needs to do, we need some kind of tie-breaking. Okay? And if we want a tie-breaking rule that's not too complex, we might simply say we break ties according to indices of the agent. So we simply have a complete ordering of the agents, and then we break ties according to that ordering. So if there's several choices, we first take the choice that makes agent 1 happiest, then agent 2, and so on. Okay? So it's obvious that one could put something more clever into the tie-breaking mechanism, but actually what you would rather want is a mechanism that works, and then you do some tie-breaking that's maybe not so clever, as compared to putting all the cleverness of the mechanism into the tie-breaking. Okay? So this is kind of a reasonable tie-breaking rule. So assume we only look at tie-breaking rules that are serial in the sense that they just take an ordering of the agents and optimize according to this ordering. It could well be the case that the red agent is the first agent in this ordering. Okay? And in this case, the mechanism would return this matching. Okay? So now the blue agent is unhappy, and he could hide these two vertices. And still using the same mechanism and the same tie-breaking, now the blue agent has actually gained. Okay? So what this tells us is simply taking this mechanism and serial tie-breaking doesn't do the job for more than two agents. So also observe that for two agents, you don't actually need the tie-breaking rule, because as soon as you have a maximum cardinality matching inside each of the agent sets, every edge across the two sets you add is equally good for both of the agents. Okay?
Is there anything you can say without knowing anything about the graph ahead of time about the probability of gaining versus losing in this sort of instance by hiding agents? Is that possible under this particular model?
You mean if you fix the tiebreaking rule and then?
Sorry, this is backing up a step or two. So in this case, blue benefits because of how things just broke down. Is there anything that blue could know a priori to give some indication about the distribution of outcomes?
So you want to look at random graphs, or
sorry?
You want to look at random graphs, or?
I mean, in this model,
So
is
the
there
mechanism
anything
the mechanism is public. Everyone knows.
So no, I understand the mechanism is public, but the network is only revealed once everyone puts their information out simultaneously.
Do you mean what fraction of graphs are manipulable?
Yes. Or even what type of output? Is there anything?
We haven't looked at it.
Okay.
You sort of need to know what the underlying distribution of.
Yeah, but let's say you have the uniform distribution of a graph. You just want to know the fraction of graphs that are manipulable.
Just curious if that was part of the model, if that was something that required outside.
Okay, so let's try a slightly more clever generalization than the one that we just saw that didn't quite work. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we split the set of agent into two sets. So that's what I'm going to call a bipartition. Okay, so we simply partition the set n of agents into two sets, and then we choose a matching as before. But we have this additional property 2, that simply disallows patients to be matched if they belong to agents that are on the same side of the bipartition. Okay? So now we only allow patients to be matched, or donor-patient pairs to be matched inside hospitals and across the bipartition. So to patients of hospitals on the other side of the bipartition. Okay? And again, so there's the first property that requires maximum cardinality on each VI. And the third property is, again, requiring maximum cardinality among all matchings satisfying the first two properties. And then we simply break ties as before. So notice that if we take the bipartition simply, so we have two agents, and one agent goes on one side of the bipartition, the other agent goes on the other side, then we get the two-agent mechanism that we saw earlier, right? Because if the two agents are on different sides of the bipartition, then the second property doesn't really mean any restriction, okay? Because we can match freely across the bipartition. And it turns out that I claimed earlier that this mechanism is strategy proof, but it turns out that actually this mechanism is strategy proof for any bipartition. Okay? So just adding this bipartition and requiring that we can only match between two different hospitals across the bipartition actually does the job. Okay? And what I'm going to do now is to give you an idea how we can prove this. So I'm not going to show you the whole proof. So actually, in the proof we distinguish between two different cases, and I'm going to show you one case, but it's going to show you the main idea behind the proof. Okay, so let me put up this slide and let me go to the board and do some illustration. So in the beginning, there's just some notation. So we have a graph G, we have a fixed bipartition, and we have a matching M, and this is simply the matching returned for graph G given this bipartition. Okay, so let me draw the bipartition. There's some agents on the left-hand side, some agents on the right, and now we have this matching M, and it's simply the matching returned by the mechanism on G given this bipartition pi. And now we look at a different matching, and this is the matching we obtain after agent I. So now agent I is the one who tries to manipulate the mechanism, and now the matching M prime is what we get after agent I hides his vertices. And this matching consists of two parts. First, it's it's the matching returned by the mechanism on the graph G prime. We get after agent I has hidden its vertices, and then we add this mi hat, which is simply additional edges the agent has added later. So his internal matching on previously unmatched vertices and hidden vertices. Okay? So this is simply m prime, and this is after manipulation. And now we want to show that the number of vertices of agent I matched in m prime is not bigger than the number of his vertices that are matched in m. Okay? So what we do now is we look at the symmetric difference between the two matchings. So it's simply we take all the edges in the first matching, all the edges in the second matching, and then we remove all the edges that are in both of the matchings. Okay? And if we look at this, we see that this symmetric difference actually consists of vertex disjoint paths, and the edges in these paths alternate between the two matchings m and m prime. Okay? So these paths might actually also be, so some of these paths might also be cycles, but I'm claiming that cycles are not interesting. So agent I is not going to gain from cycles. So why is that? Well, since edges alternate between m and m prime, these cycles need to have even length. Actually both m and m prime on these cycles match all vertices. Okay? So whichever vertices belong to agent I on this cycle, they're matched in both m and m prime. So agent I doesn't gain on a cycle. And what our argument our main argument of the proof is going to do, it simply treats paths independently. So to make things a little easier, we're now going to assume that this symmetric difference only consists of a single path, and this path is not a cycle. Okay? So I'm cheating a bit here, but it's just for this talk. Okay, so what we're also going to do is we're going to fix the direction for this path. So this is going to allow us to say that there's a start and an end vertex of the path. So we just add orientation to the path. And then we can also talk about subpaths of this path that run inside the sets of a specific agent J. Okay? So what this path is going to look like, for example, it might go here, then it goes to the other side of the bipartition, then it goes back here, and then it goes here, and then it goes here. Okay? And then it ends. So we simply orient it in this way. And then this is so always, so wherever this comes from. And then here's always one edge. And here's one edge. This is one edge. And this is one edge. And we don't know what happens here. Okay, and we can also talk about edges entering and leaving. So this should be Vj instead of Vj prime. So this is simply, so if this is agent 1 and agent 2, then this edge, so if we walk in this direction, then this edge, we say it leaves V1 and it enters V2. Okay? So this is just terminology to make things easier. Okay, so as I said, there's two cases. So the first case, we use subscripts here to actually say to actually restrict the matching to either the set of one agent or to pairs of agents. So we want to look at those edges in the matching that go inside the set of one specific agent. So this, for example, M sub II would mean those edges from the matching that are only between vertices of agent I. So they go from I to I. And down here, for example, we have mjk. This is simply all edges in the matching that are between vj and vk, vertices in set of agent j and set of agent k. So this would be edges that go across hospitals. Is that clear? Okay. So the two cases we look at now is, so the first case is that agent I actually loses inside his own set. So the number of vertices that get matched inside his own set becomes smaller, but he might still gain by getting more vertices matched from the outside. Okay? And the other case is where the two are the same. So the third case where the value is actually bigger for m prime cannot take place because we assume that m is a matching on the original graph, and we know that it's already has maximum cardinality inside vi. Okay, so it's not possible that m prime is bigger inside the set of agent I than a maximum cardinality matching, just by the definition of a maximum cardinality matching. Okay, and the case we're going to consider now is the first case. Okay. So notice that both m and m prime have maximum cardinality on all sets vj for all the agents different from I. Okay, and this is simply because these agents didn't hide any vertices. Okay, and it's so for these agents, the set of vertices is the same for both matchings m and m prime, and we required it. The mechanism requires it to have maximum cardinality inside vj. Okay, so what we notice is that now we let's look at subpaths inside set vj. So let's now assume that this is agent I, and these are all the other agents. So if we look at a subpath inside vj that is different from I, so we look at all these sets. So this is the manipulator. Then we notice that every subpath has to have even length. So this simply comes from the fact because if this was not the case, so assume the length was odd, then we still know that the edges on this path alternate between m and m prime. Okay? But we want both of them to have maximum cardinality. So if this path had odd length, then one matching would have to be bigger on this path. And this is simply not possible because then one of them is not a maximum cardinality matching because the other one is bigger. Is that clear? Okay. So what this means is that if a path like this enters with an edge from m, it must leave with an edge of m prime. Right? Because it has even length inside. And on the other hand, if it enters with an edge of m prime, then it needs to leave with an edge of m. Okay. So the second thing we need, and this is actually the main reason why this mechanism with the bipartition works, is now we're going to make use of the fact that the matching is going to be empty for all agents that are on the same side of the bipartition, right? So we can't. So the path actually has to run in the way I drew it. So it has to go whenever it leaves the vertex set of one agent. it actually needs to move or needs to enter the vertex set of an agent on the other side of the bipartition. Okay? So it always goes inside some agent set, then crosses the bipartition, goes inside the agent set, crosses the bipartition, and so on. So what this actually tells us, that if we now look at the vertex set of agent I, of the manipulator, if it leaves with an edge from M, then it needs to return with an edge from M prime. Okay? So now, let me actually draw it in a way such that this actually happens. So now, as I said, leaving with an edge of M. So this is an edge of M. Then we know that whenever it leaves the vertex set of this agent, it's going to leave with an edge from M prime. So in this case, where it goes back directly to agent I, we know from the previous argument that it's going to do this with an edge of M prime. Okay? But given that we always move back and forth between the bipartition, we can actually say whenever it goes to the right with an edge of M, it will go to the left with an edge of M prime, no matter if it goes back directly to the set of agent I or to another agent and then back to the right and then back to I. Okay? So what this tells us is that now if we look only at the set of edges that are, or at all edges that are not inside the set of agent I, then this is a collection of paths or subpaths, and all but two of them have one edge in M prime and one edge in, so one edge entering VI or leaving VI in M, and one edge entering or leaving, so this should actually be I instead of J here, in M prime. Okay? And why is it all but two of them? This is simply because the path starts somewhere and ends somewhere. And for the place where it starts and where it ends, we cannot use this argument, right? So it might start inside VI, or it might start on this side and go into VI, and there we cannot say anything. But for all edges or all parts of the path where it leaves VI and then comes back to VI, we know that there's going to be it's going to do one with an edge of M and one with an edge of M prime. Okay. So now you probably already see where this is going. So now let's look at the utility of agent I for M. This is simply he gets a utility of 2 for all edges that are inside his set, and probability of 1 that enter probability of 1 for all edges that enter or leave his set. Okay. We can just do the same for M prime. And now I'm going to write this differently. So I'm going to write this as 2 times M prime I plus 1. And here I've added 2. And now I'm going to subtract these 2 over there. So now we know that this is actually at least as big as this, because we assume that M sub II is bigger than M prime sub II. Okay? So it's actually greater or equal than this plus 1. And by the argument I just showed you, we also know that the number of edges leaving or entering the set VI is at most 2 bigger for M prime. And now what we have is that the utility of agent I for M is at least the utility of agent I for M prime. Okay? So now what we still need to show is that the second case, that this also works in the second case. Okay? But I'm not going to do this in the talk. Okay, so let's go back to the mechanism. And one other nice property of this mechanism is that we can actually execute it in polynomial time. And how does this work? Well, we have these three types of constraints, and we can simply put weights on the edges inside each agent set, across the different agent sets, and so on. We can actually put weights on each edge, such that if we take a matching of maximum that has maximum weight, we actually enforce it to be a matching satisfying these properties. And it's known that also finding a maximum cardinality matching can be done in polynomial time, but also finding a maximum weight matching can also be done in polynomial time. So this mechanism can now actually be implemented efficiently, so computationally efficiently. So as we also saw before, the two-agent mechanism we started with is an instance of this mechanism. So, and we also saw that it's too efficient. So we actually have a strategy proof and too efficient mechanism for two agents. And we saw, given the lower bound already works for two agents, we know that this mechanism is optimal. Okay. On the other hand, this mechanism doesn't give us a finite approximation ratio for more than two agents. Because if we have more than two agents, then there's two agents that have to go on the same side of the bipartition. And there might be a case where all edges are only between these two agents, and the mechanism is not allowed to take any of these edges. So the approximation ratio is infinite in this case. So what are we going to do now? Any ideas? Okay, let's randomly create a partition. So this is now a random mechanism. And we do it in such a way that for each agent we just flip a coin, and if it comes up heads, we put them on the left side of the bipartition. If it comes up tails, then we put them on the right side of the bipartition. And then once we have the bipartition, we're going to run match sub pi for this bipartition. So it turns out that for any number of agents, this mechanism is universally strategy proof. So universal strategy proofness is a stronger requirement that simply says for every choice of randomness of the mechanism, it's still strategy proof. So even if we tell the agents beforehand which random numbers we're going to use, it's still strategy proof. And the more surprising thing is that this mechanism is still too efficient in expectation. Okay, so we don't lose anything by disallowing vertices inside one side of the bipartition. Okay, so let me wrap up. So here I've drawn a table of the bounds, upper and lower bounds that we currently know. So for two agents, and we already have an optimal deterministic mechanism, but we don't currently have. So we noticed earlier that the lower bound is smaller for randomized mechanism, and we don't have a randomized mechanism that, or a randomized strategy proof mechanism that currently beats this bound. But I'll go into say more about that in a second. So for deterministic and n agents, we have the same lower bound, but no upper bound. So here we basically don't know anything. And as we just saw, for n agents and randomized, we still have an upper bound of 2, and the lower bound is still 4/3. So let me draw what we conjecture is actually the true value. So we conjecture that for n agents, we cannot do anything. Here we conjecture that the randomized mix and match mechanism we just saw is optimal. And here we conjecture that we can actually do better and really for two agents get down to the lower bound. And the reason we believe this is that we actually have a mechanism which achieves this bound, but we cannot show or haven't been able to show that it's strategy proof. And this mechanism works as follows. So just toss a coin, and depending on the outcome of this coin toss, either execute mix and match, or return a maximum cardinality matching. So the why this achieves a bound of 4/3 is kind of clear, but it's also hard to show. So if it's really strategy proof, it's hard. It's probably hard to show that it is. Okay, and there's also several interesting possible extensions of our work. So for example, we could look at stronger notions of stability. So we could say what would happen if different hospitals would actually collude to cheat this exchange and team up and pool their patients and then try to get something better for both of them or for several of these hospitals. And as we already one of the attendees noted, we could also look at longer sequences of exchanges. But the problem here is that even if you only allow exchanges that are short, of constant length, then it's already NP hard to find or to decide whether there's an optimal such exchange that makes everyone happy. Okay, so I'll end here. Question?
So for the infinity, you don't think that some function of n could be put there, possibly growing function of n? You think
So
for 3 agents, it's
yeah. So I think our conjecture basically.
So no constant. No constant.
You don't know a constant upper bound depending on n. Or even for 3 agents.
I think in the paper we're very careful to say that we conjecture there's no constant, that there's no constant upper bound.
Yeah, but I think this conjecture basically comes from the fact that
So one edge we know we have a mechanism that guarantees selecting one edge if there is one.
Ah, true.
So the lower one definitely isn't infinity.
True. True.
It's at most the number of edges.
Right. So you do the number of edges.
No, but not number of edges and then agents. So number of
Right.
edges.
N squared if n is the number of edges. Right. So the lower bound won't be more than n squared.
No, that mechanism only might.
Sorry. Yeah. We might have many. Right.
Yeah.
So what happens if you do some,
What n is the number of edges?
recursive bipartitioning? So first I have a bipartition, say I have 4 agents. I bipartition, and I bipartition each of those halves. Now I do your bipartition. All right, I'm not sure I have a specific idea, but does it have you thought about any kind of?
No, so I think the conjecture just comes from the fact that we tried everything we could think of and everything that worked in other cases.
So we don't even have a mechanism that can guarantee 2 edges if there are 2 edges in the graph. But your suggestion is
So something like,
randomized.
so let's say deterministic. So I have 4 agents, and now I'll take these 2, and I'll do a maximum matching within this hospital, and maximum matching within this hospital, and then add as many edges as possible. Do the same on the other half, and then add as many edges as possible crossing between the 2.
But then again, you might have a situation where, so ultimately you would have 2 agents where you're not allowed to have edges between them. These may be exactly the 2 edges where the only edge in the 2 agents where the only edge in the graph is between these 2 agents.
Why do I have I'm allowing edges between, but I'll do it first. I'll focus on one half, and I'll allow.
Right, but yeah, so if you choose your halves in a way that depends on the graph, then you're going to lose strategy proofness. If you don't choose your halves in a way that depends on the graph, then you might end up with a graph where the only edge in the graph is an edge you're not allowed to choose because it's between agents.
But I haven't ruled out choosing any edges.
His proposal is slightly different. It's that it's a different way of tie-breaking. Essentially, the thing about tie-breaking. So you first tie-break in favor. You do sort of a tree of tie-breaking rather than a serial tie-breaking. So I think the 2 are equivalent with 3 3 agents, in which case we have a counterexample showing it doesn't work with 3 agents. So I'd be surprised if it did work with 4 agents. But
And a more or less technical question. Is there any kind of estimate of what is the current cost social welfare well, I don't know what one does, but presumably right now they just do maximum matching on what's declared.
Yeah, I think what they do is matching with longer sequences, right?
But what I'm saying is for what's the does anyone have a guess at what price we're paying for using non-strategy proofness? Isn't it bigger than 30% or 100%?
So my guess is that at least at the moment the cost of doing non-strategy proof is smaller than our results say the cost of going strategy proof would be. I think probably in the short run it might make sense to do something which is not strategy proof but much harder to manipulate than they do, which would be to use a mechanism where you just you have you omit that second condition forbidding the edges across the bipartition, basically, which is then you have a non-strategy proof mechanism, but I think in practice the cost of that essentially just says prefer internal matchings and then give the best matching you can between things, so that in practice, given sort of what the theory says about the cost of imposing, seems potentially a reasonable trade-off at the moment. And then you sort of have to watch it and see, does it become a big problem with hospitals? Maybe as time goes on and they get smarter about knowing what's out there.
Problem is, how do you find out whether somebody manipulated?
They've seen it because basically you can track operations that have occurred. Hospitals sort of publish all sorts of information about their operations that occurred. And if you see, kidney transplant occurred, this doesn't match anything that was in our registry, then you can find out after the fact that somebody cheated.
But also, of course, the approximation bounds are worst case. So it might be the case that usually we lose a much smaller percentage of efficiency.
I don't know that's well, because if you're disallowing sort of half the potential edges.
No, but we really lose the place where we lose a factor of 2 is these chains, which like people pointed out might not be the structure you usually see in kidney exchanges.
I think that's going to be somewhat dense in practice. Like,
yeah, if the grants
there's only so many blood types of the pairs, and then once you start getting within tiers of the same blood type, there's only so many histone compatibilities. Yeah. So these chains of length longer than 7 are just getting
if the graph is dense, then that's true. Then the loss might not be so bad.
Right.
Although on the flip side, so in terms of sort of counterexample strategy proofness, because of sort of the argument he showed where everything comes down to symmetric differences, even when you have these denser graphs, often you can have the counterexample embedded in this because what matters is the path you get out of the symmetric difference at the end.
Yes.
So for example, that counterexample could be redrawn as a clique of size 4 matching with a clique of size 3 here and a guy and another clique of size 3 and a guy. So it doesn't have to be quite as sparse as that line.
Right.
Made it look.
Lose as much welfare there.
So I can draw that same example with a bunch more edges and still have the exact same effect on
the same
welfare.
number of edges, but so the number of people not matched.
The number of people not matched would be the exact same, but you just have had many more edges you could have used, but they don't actually help you.
Right.
So
they do change the ratio. They just don't really change the number of people not matched.
The
if
ratio
you're actually evaluating relative to the whole world of kidneys.
Yeah.
But
so I'm actually still not clear on what you mean.
So I think John's comment is similar to the one I was making yesterday. Okay, so I think John's comment is, strategically, people may gain by behaving strategically. If the social welfare after the strategic behavior is just as good, then why should we be upset about it? But the problem is, how one reasons about that. That, well, if I know that you might have an incentive to deviate, now I have a more complicated. Now I can't reason about my incentive just based on other people being truthful, right?
Right.
And
sure.
so you have this. It becomes much messier, but conceivably, in one type of thing, which kind of way of analyzing these sorts of situations is these like set Nash notions, where you say, okay, well, each person has a set of strategies, and anything in my set is a best response to all other people selecting arbitrarily from their sets. Or no matter what people do in the other sets, there is a best response within my set. And so somehow it still has this, stability.
I don't know uses of this mechanism, mechanism design. So
I think there's a paper of
Is that the best reply mechanism paper?
I don't remember, but there is we used it in some paper with David in this crypto and game.
I think I know which paper
but,
it is.
There was some other paper of Nissan and others who are recently using it as well.
I know there's like solution concept in game theory, but it seems a bit hard to apply in mechanism design.
Usually you're talking about rationalizable strategies.
I don't remember the term that the Nissan paper.
No, we can find the paper. I think I know which one it is.
Yeah.
No, but in terms of worst case, but there's a Sunil and I had a long discussion about it. And in terms of worst case, the worst case of not having strategy proofness would be worse than our worst case result, because then everybody is lying, and you get an outcome that has nothing to do with the. So in this case, everybody would maybe hide all the vertices and we lose all the edges between. But
so do we know? So like we have reasonable distributional information about what the graph looks like, and do we know what the welfare of everybody doing in-hospital matches and then only telling the world about the ones they can't match is? I mean, that's sort of the baseline, right? That's really the worst case that we can get is every hospital matches all the people.
That's basically what this mechanism, what our mechanisms are doing for you. So they're first doing maximum matching, so that they're sort of they're simulating this. So basically, I guess the bounds would be
right. But the real issue is what you want to do is you want to make sure that hospitals can say like, okay, here's two people I can match, but I'm going to actually match this one to someone out here, and then this one to someone out here who couldn't be matched with each other. So if the mechanism doesn't do that, it's not really providing anything over this baseline of hospitals match inside the hospital and then tell the world about the ones they can't do.
Yeah, so you can think of it as an analysis of how good this would be, right? So
okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Actually, I just had a quick question about this universally strategy proof. I'm
Yes.
just not sure I quite understood what you're saying. Is that I can tell everybody which side of the partition everybody is on,
Yes.
and then it's still strategy proof?
Yes.
Isn't that the same as the deterministic case where I fix a...
No, but the approximation is what benefits from
Okay, so
not
it's just different in efficiency, but it's...
another way.
Oh, right, the deterministic mechanism is...
So just it's just to
Another way to characterize universal strategy proofness is that it is a distribution over
over strategy proof. Okay.
So this was just to emphasize. So usually when you have a randomized mechanism and you say it's strategy proof, then it's then you mean strategy proof in expectation.
Okay.
So
Right.
not
like,
knowing
so
them.
your flip and match would not be universally.
For example, so flip and match would not be universally strategy
Okay.
proof.